All right, welcome at-home students to your video for the day. This is technically note set number 3. I flip-flopped the one from Monday and today accidentally because I forgot that it was at the end of this note set. So there you go. So it really doesn't make a difference. It's all going to be the same material, just at different times. So that's actually okay. So for those of you who are at home, clearly there's no Zoom today. You're just doing this note set. Get it done today. Secondly, tomorrow, no Zoom. I will drop a write and reading assignment first thing in the morning for everybody to do. Home kids, school kids, you just do it. And then study for your vocabulary. I did have scheduled that I probably was going to have your test next week, but it looks like I'm not sure we're going to be able to squeeze that in. We might be able to because I think we only have one set after this one. Um, we'll see how it goes. Possibly. Might do a mote set. Might do a note set Monday, vocab quiz Tuesday, review Wednesday, Thursday, Friday test. We'll try. I really don't want to extend the stuff out any further. So we'll see. We'll make a go of it. But definitely after this, you should be working on your vocab tomorrow, and then we'll figure out how the week's going to play out. So with that being said, this note sets first part we actually already did. So I'm just going to zip through it. Remember that it was the section on the scientists and Galen and Ptolemy, about their importance in terms of science, and then their daily life as well as gladiators. Remember, we did all that stuff. And then where we left off is we talked about the difference in terms of gender roles in Rome and how the boys learned rhetoric. They got the higher of the education, but women or girls did the reading and writing and prepared for womanhood. So where I left off and forgot was that, well, we didn't fully talk about women. So I'm going to make sure that we do talk about women because they had an important role in Roman society. Now, it wasn't, everything that women had wanted, but definitely was better than it was in terms of Greece because they did have some opportunity. They had a ceiling, but the ceiling wasn't nearly as low as it was going to be for Greece life. So for Roman women, you're not full citizens, so you do have some partial freedoms, and that really depended on your husband's wealth. Now, this is where I throw in the joke in class. I say, so you got to find yourself a sugar daddy. You've got to find someone and hope that your family marries you into, or you find somebody who has some wealth, because the more wealth and freedoms that your husband has, power, then essentially you're going to go to that level as well. So you might find love in the arms of a poor person, and well, then you're going to go down to that level if you were hired to begin with. So it all depends on your husband's wealth. But here's what you could do. So this is where it is different from Greece, is that you could own land, you could run businesses, you could manage the household. Now, that may not sound like a lot of fun managing the household, but I mean, that's like when your husband is away or at war, or if he's like a senator or something, that at least you have the opportunity to do these things. In Greek society, they really didn't think you were smart enough to do these things. So you may not be full on citizen, but if we're looking at Greece here, then Rome is up here. So at least you've gotten elevated in social status, but not to where you want to be completely understood here. But you have opportunities there. And as I said, women with lots of women with less money had less freedom. So again, that was really dictated by that wealth and that power of your husband. Again, doesn't seem fair. Completely understood. Clearly wouldn't pass in modern times. And then we get to the issue of slaves. And this is one of your questions that you had before about why would you want to have less slaves. Now, Romans carried on that tradition of Greece in having slaves as well. But as we said, that we have, sorry, Mr. Anderson was at the door, that nobody wants to be enslaved. And it's not great for anybody by any means. But in terms of Roman society, a couple things changed. First of all, you had a lot more slaves for whatever reason. Now, it wasn't like we would think of slavery so much in, if we're looking at U.S. history, not quite like to those conditions because you did have a little more opportunity, a little more freedoms. But again, nobody's waking up in the morning going, hey, I'm glad to be a slave. But why 100 BC, 40% of the people in Rome were slaves, and most of your slaves came from conquered lands. So 40% of the people, that's where that problem occurs. And we'll talk about this. If you have 40% of people in Rome, slaves, 60% not, then that's a very close percentage to being 50-50 and a potential for someone to go against slavery and to raise up an army. And guess what? Well, that thing kind of does happen. But again, this was dictated, your role as a slave, by how educated you were. If you were a Greek slave who were conquered and you could prove that you were intelligent, then you would have higher level jobs. And again, still a slave. The ultimate is not being a slave. But these might be teachers, these might be doctors. But you're like, oh, that wouldn't be so bad. But in the case of teachers, I know the story of them is that oftentimes slaves would be hired into the family, taken into the family. And like I would have, if I was a Greek slave and I was a teacher, I would come into your house and I would tutor you and teach you different things. Now, if you did not do your job and you did not take to the education, I could be the one that would end up being punished because of you not doing your work and doing what you're supposed to be doing. And you're like, ooh, I wouldn't mind that, Mr. Sire. Okay, thanks a lot there. Appreciate it. But anyways, so again, it was dictated by what your education was. Now, again, it was slave life. Goodness, I'm having a hard time talking today. It was slave life, so it was miserable. And nobody wants to do this. And you could be severely punished. Well, you are a slave after all. So with the number of slaves that you have and the mistreatment of slaves, you do have that potential for uprisings. And you actually did have this. You had this in 73 BC, slave uprising by a gladiator named Spartacus. Now, according to the story, Spartacus had been a former warrior. He had been captured. He's put into slavery. He turns into a gladiator, and he kind of rises up the ranks of being a gladiator. Well, in turn, he also wins people over like fellow slaves, and they end up revolting. And this revolt is actually pretty successful. Now, there's a miniseries, I think HBO did it, but also there's a movie from the 60s with Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell. In it, and you can see him here in this picture where he rose up from the ranks, got out of his gladiator ship, and rose up an army of 70,000 strong. That's a lot. That's a lot of slaves, but that's a big army too. He ended up defeating 2 Roman armies. Now, the revolt ended, like any good revolt, when the leader dies. And in this case, he ends up dying, and him and 6,000 other people end up being crucified. According to the story, it's all along the roads into Rome. They end up being crucified up top and left there. So people are reminded to not revolt against Rome. Now, here's where this is good for slaves, this whole revolt thing. Obviously, it didn't change in slavery as a whole, but it got the Romans thinking, saying, man, we shouldn't do this stuff. Maybe we shouldn't have so many slaves. Maybe we should mistreat them so much. And then maybe we don't have these uprisings anymore. And so that's why we're talking about slavery being an issue for Rome when Rome starts falling, is they still have the high amount of slaves. They're trying to reduce it as quickly as possible. And this is what some of your emperors were trying to do, like Julius Caesar as well. Religion-wise, we mentioned this the other day, how Constantine had become the first Christian Roman emperor. Well, religion was very different in the Roman Empire, is you had a vast amount of religions. You had, at the time period, oh my goodness, Judaism was very prevalent. Christianity was starting to take off. Polytheism was very active as well. Islam, not so much. It's coming up here very shortly, as we'll talk about in the next unit. But you had a lot of different religions in that area of the world. Remember, they conquered all that Mediterranean area. So there's many different countries that are right there that would end up having many different religions. So for Rome, they were, first off, they're polytheistic. Poly meaning more than one. Theism, the concept of God. So polytheistic means the worship of many gods. And for the Romans, it was really easy. They got lazy, not really lazy, just not creative, I guess, is they took on the Greek gods as their former people had been, and they gave them Roman names. So I'm just going to go through a few of these. These are the only ones that you might be responsible for on a test. So Zeus becomes Jupiter. Zeus becomes Jupiter, the king of the gods, or the main god. Aphrodite becomes Venus. Remember the Aphrodite being the goddess of love, and now that is Venus. For those of you who are 80s fans, there's an 80s song by Bananarama that says, that's a song called Venus, and it's I'm your Venus, I'm your fire, what's your desire? And it's about the goddess of love. There you go. So Aries becomes Mars. There's Mars right there. Like not Mars candy bars, no. Okay, anybody see a theme yet? What's the theme? Like, oh, they're named after the planets. No, the planets are named after them. So you have a few of these. Jupiter, your big planet, right? Venus, Mars. So they take on these names. There's Neptune. Now, some of you might be familiar with Neptune from the SpongeBob cartoon, but he is Poseidon, the same thing. He's riding a seahorse and carrying a trident, still not wearing any clothes there, I guess. Much like Poseidon in the picture that we had. Like I said, pop culturally, you probably know Neptune from SpongeBob. Hades becomes Pluto. Now, rest in peace, Pluto. Pluto, no longer a planet. Or is it? I don't know. I keep losing track. Pluto, also name of Mickey Mouse's dog. But here is Pluto here, becomes Hades. Remember, Hades is the basically the keeper of the lower part of the world. And here's Cerberus, the headed dog. So again, keeping the same theme and keeping some of the same traditions as the Roman gods do. And also, like Roman gods, or Greek gods, the Roman houses had altars for their household gods. So, for example, if you were a Roman soldier, Mars probably would be your prominent god because he's the one who controls warfare. So it all makes sense. So again, these are the only ones you have to know. Just want to do a little quick comparison. I don't think knowing 5 of them is asking too much. Now, on the flip side, as I said, other religions were allowed, and this is pretty pretty forward thinking for the Romans, and it's also a way to appease the people that they conquered. That if you abide by what we're supposed to do, if you don't cause any problems, we're going to let you practice what you want. Just don't do anything illegal. Just don't cause any problems to the government. And we kind of have that same rule today in the U.S. is that you have the right to worship however you want to or not. You don't have to worship anything. But it's all got to fall in this framework of the laws. Once your religion does things like they shouldn't do and they go out of the box, that's when they break the laws and cause a problem. It's like we'll talk about next year with the amendments. Can you worship whatever you want to? Yes. Can you do like human sacrifices? No, because it's against the law. So you always got to keep that in mind here. So as long as they're not a threat to the government, they can practice whatever they want to. So for Christianity, here's where this really starts to take off. Pretty close to this time period is after the death of this Jesus figure. And we'll talk more about Jesus when we get to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism in the next unit. But Christianity was allowed to practice their religion, but at times they were persecuted against. And we'll see this quite a bit, where they were burned at the stake, where they were crucified, where they were fed to the lions and the gladiators at the Colosseum because of the persecution and the hardships that they faced. So at times they were very forgiving and gave people religious freedoms, and at times there was persecution too. So the two kind of go hand in hand. So we'll expand upon this a little bit more as we get to the Christian section. We get to religion. So is that it? Yes, that's it. Look at that. 14 minutes. Not asking too much, is it? No, of course, those poor kids in class time, it'll take even longer. So hopefully you got through all your notes set. Make sure you guys answer your questions on the back side. Some of you guys are getting 8 points every time because you don't bother to do a couple questions on the back. And so get all your points that you can. All right, so that is note set number 4. We have one note set left in which we're going to talk about your relatives, the barbarians, and what they do to Rome and how Rome kind of ends. So there you go. Have a good weekend because I won't see you until you come back, and let's finish it well. One last week before Christmas break. Yes. All right, catch you later. Turn this in.